At the dawn of the 20th century, San Francisco felt invincible. The gold rush had catapulted a windswept frontier outpost into a pulsating Pacific metropolis where steamships, cable cars, bankers, longshoremen, vaudeville stars, and newly arrived immigrants all jostled for space on its famously steep streets. City Hall's gilded dome, taller than the U.S. Capitol, glittered in the California sunlight, a civic statement that anything felt possible on the far edge of the continent. At night, electric arc lamps bathed Market Street in a futuristic glow. Yet beneath that self-assured swagger lay an uneasy truth. The city straddled one of the most restless geological faults on Earth. The San Andreas Fault is a 1,200-kilometer seam where the massive Pacific tectonic plate grinds northward against the North American plate. The motion is slow, about 5 centimeters each year, but stress never vanishes. It merely stores itself like a coiled spring. Minor shivers were common. Residents called them jolts and swapped stories over coffee. Only a few seismologists existed in 1906, and their instruments were primitive smoked glass drums tracing spidery lines. Most citizens were content to ignore the subterranean menace. Insurance companies wrote policies that excluded acts of God, and building codes focused more on fire than on lateral ground movement. The stage was set for catastrophe. April 18, 1906 began unremarkably. Temperatures hovered near 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and a thin mist drifted off the bay. Fishmongers trundled carts toward the waterfront. Bakers loaded brick ovens. Milk wagons rattled over cobblestones. At precisely 5:12 a.m., a foreshock lasting about 20 seconds rippled through the city, rattling windows and snapping sleepers awake. Before anyone could gather their wits, the main shock erupted. Clocks forever frozen at 5:13 a.m. preserved the moment when 480 kilometers of the San Andreas lurched as much as 6 meters in less than a minute. Contemporary witnesses described an undulating motion so violent they could not remain standing, accompanied by a deafening low-frequency roar like 1,000 locomotives. Blocks of granite coping popped from buildings like corks out of champagne, one reporter wrote. Steel columns twisted. Brick cornices rained onto sidewalks. Wood-frame Victorian houses, flexible yet poorly braced, slid off their foundations. The brand-new Fairmont Hotel, scheduled to open the next week, lost its ornate turrets. Gas mains splintered, spurting invisible fumes. All 3 elevated water reservoirs ruptured, sending millions of gallons cascading uselessly into gutters. South of Market Street, land reclaimed from the marsh sped up the destruction. Soft soil amplified seismic waves, toppling cheap boarding houses occupied by dockworkers and sailors. By the time the ground stilled, more than 28,000 buildings were damaged or destroyed. Disasters rarely arrive alone. Within minutes, sparks from severed wires, overturned stoves, and shattered chimneys kissed hungry gas clouds. Dozens of fires blossomed across the city. Fierce winds fanned them westward. Fire Chief Dennis Sullivan, mortally injured when a chimney collapsed through his residence, could not direct the response. His crews discovered hydrants useless. The water system was in tatters. Desperate volunteers formed bucket brigades from cisterns and ornamental fountains, but flames leapt entire streets with horrifying ease. Witnesses on Telegraph Hill watched orange plumes merge into a single inferno that seemed to breathe, pause, and lunge again, devouring everything in its path. Mayor Eugene Schmitz telegraphed President Theodore Roosevelt for help. By midday, 1,600 soldiers from nearby Fort Mason marched in, enforcing martial law, though technically no such declaration was ever signed. Under General Frederick Funston's orders, troops joined firefighters in a controversial tactic, dynamiting buildings to create fire breaks. With little experience and erratic winds, many blasts only spread embers. The most notorious misfire occurred on Jesse Street, where gunpowder ignited a liquor warehouse. Flaming whiskey cascaded through gutters like flaming rivers. Yet in a few key spots, most famously around the U.S. Mint, the strategy worked. The granite lady vaults, stuffed with 1/3 of the nation's gold reserves, survived intact behind scorched walls. As smoke blotted out the sun, 250,000 residents, fully half the population, fled toward the Presidio or the windswept dunes of Golden Gate Park, clutching bundles of bedding, parakeet cages, or whatever keepsake they could manage. Ferry boats jammed with refugees crossed to Oakland and Alameda. Makeshift tent cities mushroomed on every lawn. The army erected communal kitchens serving earthquake stew, a ration of rice, beef, and whatever donations arrived by rail. Despite horrifying conditions, charitable groups mobilized rapidly. Within 48 hours, carloads of supplies rolled in from Los Angeles, Portland, even distant New York. The American Red Cross under Clara Barton coordinated national fundraising, setting a template for modern disaster relief. Officially, 498 deaths were recorded, a number later revealed as a political maneuver to preserve investor confidence. Modern studies suggest the true toll surpassed 3,000, making it one of the deadliest disasters in U.S. history. Property losses approached $400 million in 1906 dollars, or roughly $10 billion today. More than 500 city blocks lay in ashes. The business district, Chinatown, south of market warehouses, opulent Nob Hill mansions, all reduced to skeletal chimneys and warped rails. Insurance disputes erupted immediately. Most policies covered fire but not earthquake. For claimants, proving that flames rather than shaking had destroyed a structure became a Kafkaesque exercise in semantics that dragged on for years. Ironically, the ruin advanced science. Professor Andrew Lawson of UC Berkeley led a statewide survey whose exhaustive report mapped every surface rupture and landslide. He invited geologist Harry Fielding Reid, who formulated the elastic rebound theory. Strain builds slowly along a fault until suddenly released in an earthquake, after which the crust rebounds to a lower energy state. Their findings revolutionized hazard assessment worldwide. The Lawson report also recommended anchoring buildings to foundations and designing structures to sway safely, a radical idea that would influence Japanese and Californian engineers alike. In a very real sense, the skyscrapers that define modern skylines owe their resilience to lessons etched in San Francisco's rubble. While embers still smoldered, civic leaders met in Oakland's Claremont Hotel, vowing to rebuild bigger, better, and stainlessly pure. They hired architect Daniel Burnham, fresh off beautifying Chicago, to draft a grand Beaux-Arts master plan featuring diagonal boulevards, lakes, and monumental civic centers. Cost and urgency killed most of these visions, yet elements survived. The 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition showcased gleaming palaces on landfill that would become the Marina District. Within 3 years, the downtown core was humming again, now equipped with an auxiliary saltwater fire main system and stricter building codes. The city's resurrection became a rallying cry for American optimism, proof that the West still embodied second chances. Chinatown, almost entirely flattened, was nearly relocated south of the city. Chinese merchants, however, lobbied fiercely to stay put, realizing their quarter had become a tourist magnet. They rebuilt in flamboyant Oriental fantasy architecture, pagoda roofs, dragon-topped balconies, designed by white architects to satisfy Western imaginations. Thus, an ethnic enclave survived by reinventing itself as a stage set, simultaneously preserving community cohesion and commodifying its culture. The fire also erased exclusionary records. Many Chinese immigrants later claimed lost birth certificates, enabling families to unite despite federal restrictions. Out of ashes, a marginalized group carved unexpected leverage. For laborers and the poor, recovery proved harder. Rents soared once housing stock vanished. Tenements multiplied behind ornate facades. Progressive reformers blamed rapacious landlords and demanded city-owned utilities. The disaster accelerated municipal ownership of streetcars and sparked debates about zoning, public health, and racial segregation. Women organized soup kitchens that evolved into permanent civic clubs, giving them new political clout years before nationwide suffrage. African American newspapers highlighted discrimination in relief camps, foreshadowing later civil rights battles. In short, the quake shook not only bricks and timbers, but also the entrenched hierarchies of class, gender, and race. San Francisco's claims nearly bankrupted London's venerable Lloyd's syndicates. Some 20% of Britain's total gold reserves sailed across the Atlantic to settle policies, briefly destabilizing the pound sterling. The crisis spurred the creation of reinsurance consortia and actuary science to quantify seismic risk. American banks, meanwhile, funneled reconstruction loans westward, knitting the nation's capital markets more tightly than ever. Paradoxically, the catastrophe enriched certain industrialists who owned brick yards, lumber mills, and shipping fleets, illustrating capitalism's capacity to profit from misfortune. Early filmmakers recognized both the horror and spectacle. Thomas Edison's crews captured grainy footage of toppled buildings and panicked refugees just days afterward, footage that historians still analyze for structural failure clues. Over the following decades, Hollywood returned repeatedly. The 1936 MGM epic San Francisco set box office records with a dramatized quake sequence so realistic audiences screamed in theaters. Each reenactment reinforced the event's mythic stature, a morality play about hubris, chaos, and rebirth. Even after the city embraced cable cars and counterculture, tourists continued to ask hotel clerks where they might see the earthquake, as though it were a permanent exhibit. Structural engineers cite 1906 whenever they retrofit hospitals, bridges, or data centers. Moment-resisting steel frames, base isolation bearings, tuned mass dampers, all trace conceptual lineage to the catastrophe. Seismic sensors today relay data in real time to the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, an impossibility in Lawson's era.
Chaque table laboratory in Pasadena and Berkeley sti Ripley 1906 es grundmotion record tout torture test material.
The lesson is sobering. Nature's forces cannot be tamed, only respected, and respect demands rigorous design backed by political will and public funding. On October 17, 1989, the magnitude 6.9 Loma Prieta earthquake rattled the Bay Area during a televised World Series. Thanks to modern codes, deaths numbered 63 instead of thousands. Yet collapsed freeways and pancaked apartments reminded residents that the old fault was merely biding its time. Geologists warn that stress has again accumulated along the northern San Andreas and companion faults like the Hayward. In emergency management circles, when "not if" remains the mantra. Smartphone alert systems, retrofitted Victorian houses, and citizen CERT teams all stem from collective memory of 1906. Statistics fade, but individual voices endure. Firefighter William Hammond, who stood atop a swaying engine house praying it would not crumble. Society widow Daisy Bingham, who served soup to longshoremen in a borrowed apron. Photographer Arnold Gent, who roamed the ruins, producing haunting images now etched into textbooks. Their letters and diaries convey terror, resilience, occasional dark humor, and above all a stubborn faith that tomorrow mattered. Reading them, one senses that urban life everywhere balances on an invisible tightrope, secure until, in a heartbeat, it isn't. The Great San Francisco earthquake of 1906 was more than a local calamity. It reshaped science, finance, architecture, and social policy far beyond the Golden Gate. It exposed both the fragility of human endeavor and the astonishing capacity to rebuild. Walk today along Market Street, past glass towers, artisan coffee shops, and buskers serenading commuters, and it is hard to imagine horses stumbling over fissures where you now stand. Yet the pavements carry an unspoken memory. As your screen displays these restored monochrome images, fragments of chimneys, tent cities on sand dunes, firefighters silhouetted against volcanic flames, remember that the past is never truly past. Beneath the asphalt, the earth still waits, patient and powerful, reminding every generation of the price of complacency and the promise of renewal.